everybody. This is Chelsea from Cache Valley Counseling, and you are listening to the Puzzle of Us podcast. Today, we are talking about religion and sexuality with Conrad Cannell, who is a marriage and family therapist here at Cache Valley Counseling. And we're going to discuss everything there is everything you need to know about bridging gaps between religion and sexuality. So I'm very excited to have you here with us today. Conrad, can you tell us a little bit more about, introduce yourself, tell us what you do, what type of work you do?
Yeah, I don't know if we can answer all questions today. That's a high task, but I know we'll be able to definitely talk about some great things with regards to religion and sexuality. At least get that conversation going. That's my hope. So a bit about me. I'm from the Valley. I'm from Cache Valley. Grew up in North Logan. Been here at Cache Valley Counseling for a little bit now, and I've been a therapist for the past few years. So a lot of my work has been with adolescents, families, couples, kind of see a bit of everything. And I do work a lot with the LGBTQ plus community. So I did an internship in Circle, at In Circle House in Provo, Utah. That's where I got a lot of my discussion-based points from today is from some of that work as well as my work since there. At that time when I was working there, I led a discussion group about religion and sexuality, and there's just a lot of great conversations that we were able to have at that time, and that's something I hopefully look to sharing with all the listeners here. So excited to discuss this topic. I know it's a really important one. And as a disclaimer, it's important to note like where my background is coming from my perspective. So as a therapist, I'm also an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I know that's the major religion here in Utah as well as here in Cache Valley. And I know with that religious group, as well as with the LGBTQ plus community, there have been a lot of hurt feelings, a lot of sides, a lot of struggle. So I hope we can have some good conversations to better understand some of those perspectives. I know my religious background isn't necessarily indicative of all religions, so I know that's important to note too. I want to make sure I keep it broad experience as far as religion in general, but also my personal experience as a member of the church here.
Absolutely, and I think just getting the conversation started is great. Hopefully listeners who are listening to this can start to even evaluate their own religion or background and how they feel about bridging gaps. Today we're talking specifically about religion, but just your own personal biases towards sexuality and what that means to you and just really evaluating them. So I'm super excited about our conversation today, and hopefully those of you listening will also find it useful. You mentioned like the LGBTQ topic and religion and how to blend those two. It is a hot topic right now. What are your thoughts on how they're related and impact each other?
Yeah, they definitely impact each other, especially in the state of Utah. Definitely a hot topic in a lot of ways, and I know it's in the news quite a bit as far as what is right. And I don't know how to better say that, but when I worked at In Circle, there's a sign, and actually I think it's their motto for the company, and it says "No sides, only love." That's key, I think, in starting this conversation, and not even starting but continuing it, is there can't be sides. But too often it feels like there are sides. So working on how to increase that love and understanding is my goal. So bridges, I'll probably use that word a lot today, building bridges, making sure we're not separating the two communities, the religious and queer communities in our area, but we're actually building them, getting them closer together, making them be more understood is my hope. So with that, I think I can understand a little bit of why that is, right? Why is it such a hot topic? And I want to use the word identity. A lot of times we look at this lens of identity as really important. We identify with different things. Now, identity can be a major part of life. It is a part of oneself. It can be personal, community, also multi-systemic. There are just lots of different identities we can adhere to or feel close to. So with that being said, I think religion can be an identifying factor for a lot of people because it feels like a part of themselves. And same with being LGBTQ. That is definitely an identifying part of themselves for whoever identifies in that way as part of that community. So I think when those parts get hurt, when our identity feels threatened, it feels rejected, it feels questioned in any way, we can be angry, we can feel hurt, we can act in a lot of ways that aren't loving, and I think that's when a lot of times it feels like there are sides when those identities get challenged. So I think the major role I think our community evolves in. I think it's fascinating to see just how these conversations happen, or that they don't happen, or just the animosity that occurs between the two different communities, especially seeing it day in and day out for the past 5 years. Being a therapist is a daily, I think, struggle for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's really hard. I feel like when conversations like this do happen, because they feel so closely tied to it because of that identity, they then start kind of lashing out in a non-loving way to family members or friends or whoever, this is, and I that battle within someone who is struggling themselves, right? Like, just the name calling that happens, and the feeling of shame and things like that just play so closely tied to each other, and pull each other in different directions. And I love this idea of bridges, right? Like, there are two sides. There are these two sides of our identity. There are two sides of how we view this, and just starting those conversations just start to build those bridges, just little by little. And I think that's a great expression and a great image to kind of keep in mind as you have these conversations. Seeking to understand yourself, other people, is really the point, right? The thing that we all are hoping for. What would you say to someone who's trying to maintain kind of this religious side of themselves amidst maybe even the change in expressed sexuality? Someone who's coming out or starting to explore kind of this different sexuality, they're feeling their shift in sexuality. What would you say?
Yeah, that's something I think happens quite often that I hear as far as someone coming in for therapy. It's a very common reason why someone's just trying to figure that out, trying to navigate their religious, their faith, so to speak, as well as their sexual and gender identity. How do they manage that, navigate it? It's very happens for a lot of people. So it's complicated, and I know it is personal for each person. I know it's not always easy, but the vast majority of those individuals that you're talking about, typically from the lens that I shared earlier, are coming from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in my office. We're trying to figure out how to navigate that with their sexual gender identity. They come in seeking help, wanting to work through the clinically significant distress from trying to make it work, trying to make both parts of these identities work and the groups, and not knowing how to approach it, especially in that beginning of the journey. So I frankly point them to resources. So wanting them to understand what the church itself, their official stances are on LGBTQ issues, to really understand what that means, where they stand, what they're trying to share. I try not to speak for them as a therapist. That's not my role as a religious leader or a speaker for them, but help them understand what the church specifically says, which I know I'm not the religious leader. That would not be ethical for me to share what is right in that regard. So typically I point them to a few different websites, which is on the church's website if you need that access. If you search transgender or same-sex attraction in that church website, you'll find the resources there.
Do you find that people kind of come in with assumptions that the church has made, or things that they have kind of heard, or maybe philosophies that families have sort of adapted but aren't necessarily true to, in speaking about like the Church of Jesus Christ specifically, to that religion, or in doing that, is that people are making their own kind of assumptions and creating their own kind of viewpoints in sort of putting this resource back in front of them.
Absolutely. There are a lot of biases that aren't what the church actually shares. There's a lot of discrimination, I think, that happens. And it's, I think, just a lot of misinformation as well as uncomfortable feelings regarding these types of issues. So a big one, I've heard people saying, it's a common phrase that's been used in the past, to pray the gay away. And that they feel that they can either, if they pray harder or read their scriptures more or do more within the church, then they won't have these feelings. The church's standpoint on that is far from that. That is not what the church says that you can do. It's not actually something that is okay. That would be more like conversion therapy, which is, one, unethical and not actually legal in the state of Utah. It's not something that really is okay. I hear that one a lot, though. So I think people just feel it's.
Can you speak a little bit more to conversion therapy? I'm not sure a lot of people know like what that means or kind of what the hope for that is. And yes, by the way, it is legal. It is illegal in the state of Utah to do conversion therapy. But I think that's often a misconception as well, as like, if I go to my church leader or I go to a therapist who is even LDS or is a member of a church or a member of a faith, are they going to try and like talk me out of this? So talk a little bit about conversion therapy and how that's different. And let's start there.
So I think it comes from the notion that being gay, or in some regard queer, is a choice. I think conversion therapy feels like if you choose differently, we can make you choose differently, so to speak. And that's not the case. It's not a choice. Being gay isn't something you just choose one day to the next. It's much more, like I said, identity. And there are a lot of factors that go into it, whether it be, I mean, I can't even get into all that means, but it's not a choice. Let me just say that simply. So I think conversion therapy was to say, hey, let's work through how do you stop making either that choice or feeling like that is a part of you. So conversion therapy tries, or has tried in the past, to get you to not feel that way, to not be gay, to not be queer. So that is what I think it intended, and it's been used a lot in the past with religious leaders, not necessarily mental health providers, but religious leaders, in helping cure, and I'm using quotations there, cure that, which is not okay. But what that is, I think, did that answer your question?
Yeah, and I think I just recently am thinking about a friend, more of an acquaintance that came out and to his parents, and they basically kind of said the same thing. Well, you're not praying enough. You're not. You need to read more general conference talks. You need to read your scriptures more. And so often that is kind of what these people who are already struggling with this kind of internal battle are met with. And to me, that doesn't build the bridge. That just like explodes any bridge and puts even a wider gap in between people. And it just is really, my heart goes out to all of those on both sides. Parents then wondering, what did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong? Weren't we religious enough growing up, or things like that, sort of reflecting on their own biases or expectations for their kids, as well as, for this person who is struggling with, what do I believe religiously, and where does that fit in to what I feel sexually, and how does this all mesh together? And so I think going back to the resources and getting really clear on what is it that, in specifically speaking about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, what's the policies and principles and expectations there, and pointing people back to resources. I'm sure there are other religions out there as well that have these similar resources as well, because they're so needed.
Definitely. That's for other religions. I know there are many. Finding out what those are, what the stances are. I think there can be a lot of misinformation, especially with that example you shared with person that just came out and the parents saying you need to do more, right? I think that just gets internalized that it's a choice, and that's where a lot of people feel like it is. And so I think it's really misinformed beliefs. That's not necessarily the case for all the church says. No, that's why I say pointing back to those resources, understand what that really is. After doing so, I typically work with clients on what does that mean for them? How do they feel like they fit? Working forward with what they want, what aspects of the church, whether it be full integration or not. How does that look like? How does that impact your family, your relationships, future family, things like that? Those are all things we discuss, go forward, and try to find what they feel is best for the future. We're going down that direction to make sure they have the healthiest and happiest life they can.
Just that safe place to just explore, like ask the questions, find the resources. In feeling that safety and security with you, I'm sure clients also feel that ability to sort of question and find out what they feel instead of pressures of society, or even talking about and identifying what pressures do I feel from my parents, what pressures do I feel for myself, what pressures is this internal, battle waging, what sides do each of those look like. And so really what I'm hearing as you approach this for this person, if they're coming in really trying to figure out what this looks like for me, you're really helping them find resources, and then you are helping them explore, what does that mean for them? What does that mean for their family? What does that mean for how they want to engage religiously and even sexually at that point? Yeah, that's really awesome. I'm sure clients very much appreciate that feeling of safety that you provide for them. What are some things that you typically hear from people when it comes to not accepting one's gender or sexual or religious identity?
Yeah, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, when we have that piece of our identity that's threatened or challenged, it can really bring out some nasty behaviors because we want to protect ourselves. Sadly, I see a lot of those behaviors in my office with even my close family and friends, just the general public, just the state of not being similar, I think brings that out. And so these behaviors can be a wide variety of things. So I know there's a lot more rare is to see just complete blatant discrimination, hateful statements for either group, for either religious or sexual group. I think those happen, but it's more rare. Typically, we're not seeing those, but we're seeing the subtle things, the subtle jabs or the invalidations, the microaggressions that are much more present. They're not much more in your face, but less just ingrained in them. So these are small comments like a parent saying, you're just going through a phase, or you need to pray harder, right? Or you're anti-trans or anti-gay or anti-human because you believe in Christianity, right? From the other side. So there can be these subtle things, but also, I mean, those are the really big ones that I think people say, but also can feel subtle, like not inviting certain family members over to activities, or inviting others to feel included or that they are part of the family because of some identity. So that happens quite frequently, especially when you feel uncomfortable with someone else's identity. There can also be a tolerant attitude for a certain person, rather than seeking to understand them better and accept them as they are. Family rejection is the major indicator of poor mental health, and unfortunately the most common. It is a real problem, I think, within the LGBTQ community, and I think especially here in the state of Utah. We have one of the highest suicide rates for LGBTQ youth in the nation. And I believe a big reason for that, some of the research that I've been involved with, is because of family rejection more than anything else. And so it's important, especially with youth, to better understand them, to better accept them as they are, who they are, what they're struggling with any of the above mentioned projects. So I kind of point people towards that research, which is the Family Acceptance Project, done by San Francisco State University. It's a good resource to look up into. You can access. They'll send you a pamphlet even if you ask them to know how to better support and be there for LGBTQ youth.
I think that's really great. Again, the more resources, the more material people are getting on, and really like, what does building a bridge between these two opposing sides, which seems like they're opposing, but they're really, they can be so beautifully meshed. But it does take work. It is those, especially when it's those two identity parts of us, right? It can be really hard. So I think the Family Acceptance Project is a fantastic resource for people. You talk about building bridges and not creating sides. How can we each start doing that more? And what does that even look
Yeah,
like?
I think it's a personal journey we all have to go on. We have to be able to see others as they are, um, not question their voice, not question who they say they are, and practice the ability to be okay with being uncomfortable. I remember when I first started working at Encircle. Now I am a white heterosexual cisgender privileged male. Like when you talk about privilege, I feel like I check all of those boxes, which I don't love sometimes, but is my reality. So working in a place like Encircle, I remember the first couple of weeks being quite uncomfortable that I was the odd one out. Now I had these people within the LGBTQ community lived that day in and day out, and I didn't really fully understand it until I lived it myself. And so I think it has to come from a place of us being able to say it's okay to be uncomfortable. It's okay to spend time with people that are different than me. It's okay to be different, and it's okay to be okay with that, and just going on that personal journey I think is really important for everybody to do. It takes the whole community to be able to get to that place. So I think highly religious people and those who identify in the LGBTQ community can be different in the way they look, in the way they act, in the way they talk. um, they exist, and so being able to work through those is really important to see how we can still bridge those differences, and just become more unified. So that's some of my personal experience helping that out. Um, I don't know, Chelsea. I wonder from someone who hasn't maybe done some of that work like I have, as far as working at Encircle, how do you view you can build bridges? Like I'm going to put it back on you. How do you feel like that is something can be done in your community where you're at?
Yeah, I think it's creating that openness, right? When I myself have found myself being closed off or defensive or name calling or blaming or defensive in any way, critical of another person, it's usually, for me, it's oftentimes based out of fear, right? Fear of something, fear of me not understanding, fear of being misunderstood myself, fear of not being totally accepted myself, or if any, it's based out of that fear. And so when I'm able to identify that for myself and then also remain open, like, this is kind of scary to talk about. What if you bring up some good points that I'm not sure I'm going to have to, figure out? And so in having these conversations with people, oftentimes, it's about the discussion of it, and it is a continued conversation. And it might just be, what, like, you just made a really good point, and I got to kind of sit with it for a few minutes or a few days or a few weeks, and let's come back to this conversation, because I need to sort this out myself. I need to figure out why I have this fear coming up for me, why I feel uncomfortable about this right now. And the times that I've been able to do that for myself has created kind of this openness, right? Like, we fear what we don't understand. And as a protective strategy, we then do all the things. We blame, we get defensive, we quote things, we question things, we do all those sort of things. And I think for myself, just even recognizing, oh, I'm doing that right now, and being open with that has created more openness. Not that I've done this work or that I have really, delved into this and had to deal with it very personally, um, as far as having any family members or myself or those sort of things. But I also think there's enough of it, and I know enough people and have personally with clients worked through it, that the openness, the curiosity, what does that mean for you? What does it look like in blending your religion together? um, how you view religion, because it's different for every person. And as I've explored that for myself and remained open, it's helped me have better relationships with people, which has helped me feel like I've built those bridges, filled in those gaps even just a little bit. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard, especially when you have these kind of two, what feels like very, very much a part of you, identities that are sort of at odds or kind of not clear on expectations, or what do I do with this. It's really hard, and it definitely is a hot topic, and something we need to, as a society, continue to keep talking about.
I think if I can add to that,
absolutely.
Not a lot of people know what it's like to feel like the absolute minority. Like, to be in a place where you are the minority is not easy. And if you have experienced it, maybe you can empathize a little bit with the sense of, if you feel like you are alone, and the majority feels like you aren't wanted or welcome, you're gonna feel pretty hurt, right? You're gonna feel a lot of hatred. I think a lot of people express that, especially within the LGBTQ community, because of feeling like the minority and feeling like they're not welcomed or wanted. So I think for me, it's really been important for me to grow and understand and be able to sit there with those people, not having any expectation that I need to change their thoughts or they need to change mine, but just to be with them, just to experience life with them. And I don't think we take the time. Maybe I'm speaking too much for others, but do we take the time to really sit with those people? I've yet to have a client where I hear their story and I dislike them more, right? Every client I sit with and understand better, it makes sense why they're going what they're going through, and it helps me really empathize and see the suffering that they're experiencing. Every person is similar in that way, I believe. And so being able to do that myself, as well as those that are religious or not religious, or queer or not, like being able to just build those bridges starts with being able to be uncomfortable, to understand you're going to have differences, be okay with that, and love anyway.
Absolutely. And I think that starts with each of us individually being able to sit in those uncomfortable spaces and have the conversations, the continued conversations that absolutely need to keep happening. And that's why we need, I don't think we need to like move across country or like put ourselves specifically in these, move to a different, universe or country or different, to really experience this, but really being able to sit with it and just notice, be uncomfortable, and still be loving and choose to love is, I think, so important, and a huge stepping stone from both sides of building those bridges, filling those gaps. Well, thanks so much for your insights and all of your wisdom that you shared with us today. And religion and sexuality is going to continue to be a hot topic and is going to continue to do that. But I think everyone who's listening today can kind of take some notes from this and sort of do some soul searching themselves of how this identity, what this looks like in their own identity, and be able to kind of come to even maybe a clearer understanding of where their stance is, to hopefully provide some openness to other people and start building these bridges that are in need of being built. So thanks so much, Conrad. We appreciate you, and we look forward to having you on again.
Well, thank you, Chelsea, for having me on. I appreciate being on and being able to talk about this. Definitely passionate about it. I want to make sure people can continue having this conversation. So thank you for having me and being able to do so on this platform.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.